I'm not here this week, but I'm going to try to give you some tips on how to get through the week using these tutorials. So lesson 8.1, we talked about some of this stuff right before rodeo break, but this first lesson is fairly straightforward. The title is Solving Equations with Rational Coefficients. So let's see if I can get myself to show you kind of what that means. First of all, what does it mean to be rational? Remember, rational numbers are any numbers that can be written as fractions. Any number that can be written as a fraction. Cool, so we know what that is, and I'll show you some examples of that. And then coefficients. So what is a coefficient? Coefficient is any number, and in this case, it may be a decimal, it may be a fraction, it may be an integer, any number that is attached to a variable by multiplication. So here are some examples of rational coefficients. Negative 2x. In this case, the coefficient, I'm going to get fancy here, I'm going to use green, the coefficient is negative 2. Okay? So 3/4 r. Okay? We know 3/4 is a rational number because it's a number written as a fraction, and it's a number that's attached to the variable by multiplication. So this first lesson in chapter 8 is solving equations with rational coefficients. All right, so as we talked about last week, how do you solve an equation? You solve equations. Is this crazy, guys? I'm talking to the wall. We solve equations with inverse operations. Cool. Solve equations with inverse operations. So you work backwards. Right? You work backwards. That's what it means, inverse operations. So let's review. What's the opposite of addition? Opposite of addition is subtraction. What's the opposite of division? Oh, that's multiplication. Opposite of subtraction? Oh yeah, you guys got this. Addition. Opposite of multiplication is division. Cool. So inverse operations just mean the opposite. They undo each other. So when you're trying to solve an equation, come back over here, guys. When you're trying to solve an equation with a rational coefficient, you're going to remove the coefficient by using an inverse operation. So let's look at a few examples, and then I'm going to give you some time to get some practice problems done. Okay, so here's an example. Negative 3t equals negative 12. Okay, yeah, there are going to be a lot of integers in this stuff, so remember your integer rules. Negative divided by a negative is a positive. Positive times a negative is a negative. All of that stuff is going to come into play here. But just look at this example. Let's come in on this side. When we solve an equation, what we really want to know is what is t, right? Solving the equation is telling us what the variable is worth. So to figure out what the variable is worth, we have to look at how is that coefficient attached to that variable. This coefficient, negative 3, is attached to t by multiplication. You guessed it. Okay, so let's erase this little question mark. If it's attached by multiplication, to get rid of it, to undo it on this side of the equation, we do the opposite of multiplication. The opposite of multiplication is division. But here's the thing. If I divide on this side of the equation, I have to divide by the same number on this side of the equation to keep the equality valid. So now I'm going to go ahead and divide by negative 3 over here. Yes, I know this seems like a whole lot of work. You guys already know that the answer is positive 4 because you're super smart mental mathematicians, but you're learning the steps right now to show your work. All right, so negative 3 divided by negative 3 is 1. That gives us just t. We have now successfully isolated our variable on the left side of the equation. Doesn't matter, actually, we could have it on the right side of the equation. It matters not which side it's on, but in this case, the t happens to be on the left side of the equation. Negative 3 divided by negative 3 is t, and then we bring down our equal sign. Negative 12 divided by negative 3, 4. Now, we talked about this last week before rodeo. It's always important for you when you're working with equations to go ahead and check your solution. So how do we check that? Okay, so the equation was negative 3 times t. So is it true that negative 3, oh, that's a parentheses. Hang on, let me fix that. It is so weird to write through my camera. Okay, negative 3 times 4. The question we're asking ourselves is, gosh, does that equal negative 12? Negative 3 times 4? Yes, it does. Cool. I circle my answer. That's what it should look like when you're working on these equations.